The artwork for your podcast is going to be the main and possibly only visual element that people will see. It reflects the mood and personality of your podcast, a level of professionalism, and lets potential listeners know what to expect. They will use this artwork as part of their judgment on whether to give your podcast a try, so getting this right is important. Even if you're on a limited budget, this might be one of the areas to hire out. Whether you are hiring someone to create your artwork or tackling it yourself, here are tips and considerations for having great artwork for your podcast. Find inspiration. Go to Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app and browse through some podcasts by category. Find what other podcasts of the same topic or genre are doing for their artwork. You will likely be trying to attract some of the same listeners, and this will give you an idea of the type of artwork listeners expect for your type of podcast. This doesn't mean you necessarily have to follow that pattern. There's something to be said about standing out, but be careful that you aren't so unique that you confuse or alienate potential listeners. Face or no face. I would say if part of your goal for a podcast is to promote yourself as a host or as an expert or thought leader, it would probably be a good idea to include a picture of yourself. A common layout is to have a face from the chest or shoulders up, taking up about half the screen, and using the other half to place the title of your show. If your show has two hosts, consider placing your faces side by side at the bottom with the text on the top. Use bold typography. Remember that when people see this artwork, it's usually going to be very small. They will have a hard time reading thin fonts or something that looks cursive or handwritten. Make sure that the color you choose for your font contrasts with the background so that the text pops and is readable. Pick a light font for a dark background and a dark font for a light background. Background. Usually solid, bold colors work best for a background. A white background is usually not a great choice because the Apple Podcasts app already has a white background and you won't be able to see the edges of your artwork very well. You could also consider using a stock photo for your background if you feel like it makes sense. For example, a podcast on astronomy might consider a photo of a starry night sky or a nebula. Just make sure that if you use a photo, the text is still readable. Pexels.com is a free stock photo website you can use, even for commercial purposes. Mood and personality. Make sure the facial expressions of your photo or the colors and font and design elements you choose reflect the mood and personality of your podcast. A financial advice podcast, a comedy podcast, and a true crime podcast each represent very different moods and should each have very different looks that best represent them. One last thing to remember are the format requirements. Apple Podcasts require a minimum size of 1400 by 1400 pixels and a maximum size of 3000 by 3000 pixels. We recommend going with the max size. You'll want to export as 72 dpi with JPEG or PNG formats using RGB color space. If you don't follow these requirements, it could end up being one of the reasons your podcast gets rejected and you'll have to resubmit. Decide whether you want to hire someone to do your artwork or whether you want to do it yourself. If you are hiring someone, contact them and use the above tips to let them know what you specifically want so they can have some guidance. If you are doing the artwork yourself, using your favorite design program, create 10 different versions of the artwork for your podcast using different colors, fonts, and layouts. Choose your top 3 and get inputs from your family and friends through texting or social media. Make a final decision.